Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. Very glad you're with us this morning. This morning is March 17th, 2023. Let's see here. I'm having problems hearing myself here. Let's turn this up a little bit. Testing. Here we go. A little bit better. All right. Thank you for being with us this morning. Our agenda this morning, we'll start out with success stories. I do know of a few landings. I want to make sure we share those with everybody. We'll then go to our 30-second introductions. We will then go to our committee reports, hear about workshop, job fairs, practice interview team. Let me clean that off. There we go. And the career tip of the week. And then we will have our main event right about the top of the hour. For those people on Zoom, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just send your questions into the Zoom chat window. For those watching on Facebook, thank you for joining us this morning. Please just enter your comments, any questions you have into the comment field. We'd really appreciate that. All right, please note this event is being recorded and is currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, you give consent for your name and picture to appear. Please note that any comments you put in the Zoom chat window will not appear in the recording. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Morris. Back in 2007, I started facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. This group's been around since the late 1990s. Like I said, I took it over in 2007 when the prior person who was leading it got a job and asked who wanted to take over, and I somehow volunteered to do that. In 2008, I started a website called careerdfw.org, a website to help those who are unemployed in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In 2012, I launched a second website, careerusa.org, to help those around the United States. I have written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search that you may not know. It is available on Amazon, or I usually have copies with me all the time. And since 2017, I've been a member of the practice interview team. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. Well, we'd like to start the meeting off with good news. Do we have anybody out there who's got good news, any landing information to share? Going once, going twice? Well, I heard about a few landings I want to share. Chelsea Rivera landed this past week. She's an admin assistant at HKS. Justin Gardner landed. He's a national account manager at Factory Motor Parts. And our third landing this week is Shelly Trevino. She landed at National Cash Register as a senior accounting role. She actually did an interview with the practice interview team about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And a couple days later, she landed the job. So by practicing your interviewing skills, that's what's going to get you your next job. Anybody else out there? Any other success stories to share? All right. What we'd love for everybody to do now is please, in the video chat window, in the chat box, please put in your 30-second introductions. We want to know who you are. Give us your name, phone, email address, position you're looking for, 2 or 3 target companies. Then hit the return key. By putting all that information in, I will use that to update our roster, and I will put an email out this afternoon with any pertinent information. What I ask you to do is look over that list and see who you can help, who else is on the list that maybe you can help with a target company to be able to do that. For those people that are here in person, we'll allow everybody here to give their 30-second introductions in just a moment. So let's put 30 seconds on the clock for everybody out there. All right, you've got plenty of time to continue to do that. And just a little side note here, back when I used to use the 60-second version of this, Facebook would flag this and tell me that I'm copyright violation. But using the 30-second version, they've never stopped me. So it's very interesting how they found certain things and don't find certain things. All right, you're welcome to continue on. All right, what we want to do now is we'll pass around the microphone here. We'll let everybody here who's locally give us their 30-second introductions.
All right.
Just say hello, Mitchell.
Okay. I'm Drew Puckett, and I work in marketing technology, and I help with my analytical and critical thinking skills, help companies provide good marketing solutions. And my name is Drew Puckett.
Thank you. Thank you, Drew.
Hi, my name is Swetcha Baral. I have been working as project manager and technical project manager for the past couple of years. I help companies manage projects, technical projects. I need contacts at bigger healthcare companies like BCBS or Aetna, etc. And my name is Swetcha Bara.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rishabh Saraf, and I currently go to UTD. I'm in my final semester, and I'm doing business analytics, also data science. I was previously interning with Hertz. They do rental cars across North America, and I was a data science intern with them. And I am just trying to get into one of the big tech firms, for example, Tesla, Google, Microsoft. And my name is Rishabh Saraf again. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is David Carey. You've probably heard me on here a few times, so this may not come as a difficult or struggling or challenging introduction, but I will tell you this: if you're at home and you're typing in your stuff on the chat, that is so easy and it's so safe. I'm going to tell you, if you come into the room, one of the things that's really helpful for you is you can actually go back and watch this when it's recording, and you can just see how well or what you need to work on for your introduction. It's an opportunity that you cannot get anywhere else. So I'm going to just tell you, my name is David Carey. I am a talent development expert. I help companies align their training and employee development resources with their corporate objectives to reach success and hit their priorities and their targets. I would like contacts for anyone that knows anybody at McKesson or at KPMG. And again, my name is David Carey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Well, you're gonna wait? Okay, well, I'll wait just a second. Okay. Just a couple things. Career DFW, Career USA, two totally free websites that are out there. They're there just to help you. They don't collect any personal information. One of the things that you will find on the Career DFW calendar, on the Career DFW website, is a bunch of calendars. And you can find out about job fairs that are coming up that are in pink, special workshops that are in gold, the networking groups that are meeting in person. Come on, people, put on your big boy pants, get out. Go meet people in person. Very important. Find those groups that are all listed there in blue. All the webinars are listed in purple. All right, let's talk a little bit about the practice interview team. David's going to talk a little bit about that.
Well, good morning again, everyone. So I know most of you at this point have met other people that are also in the job search. And it's not uncommon to run across somebody that says they were in their job for 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 15 years, and they haven't interviewed. So what do you do about that? Well, you could just go out and try to get as many interviews as you can and just learn the hard way by going out there and making it happen. Not a bad idea, but I have an alternative to that, which I would encourage you to give serious consideration to. And that is to sign up for a pit crew interview. Walt's going to give you some information about some other things that you can do, but I'm not going to steal his thunder. What I will tell you is that I have personally both been a panelist and a practitioner, and the pit crew interview made a tremendous difference for me. The very first interview that I had that was actually leading to a job offer, I had a question in my first interview that had been asked in the pit crew interview. And I thought, well, nobody's ever going to ask me that question. And guess what? They did. So definitely encourage you to do this. Your first pit crew interview is probably going to be a bit of a disaster, but you got to be a disaster before you can master. And this is the place to get started on that. So how do you do that? you can go out to send an email to dallaspitcrew@gmail.com. What we need from you is we need a job description. So a job that you're going to apply for, we need a copy of your resume, and we need some times that you would be available for interview. Now we are offering, I think this week was the week that it happened. And we'll do it again in a couple of weeks. If you want an opportunity to do a live pit crew interview, so you're prepared for those interviews as people are starting to do more in-person interviews, that opportunity is coming up again next Wednesday, and you'll need to send that email out. Make sure you let us know if you're available to do this. We do this at 2:00 on Wednesdays. Would love to see you there as well. If that doesn't work for you because you've got a part-time job or something like that, then let us know what will work for you, and we'll set up something with Zoom, and we'll get you a practice interview so that you can prepare for either a real opportunity that you have coming up or an opportunity that you would like to prepare for as you're building out your playbook for your job search.
David, thank you very, very much. And as David mentioned, the pit crew is meeting in person. They're meeting in person on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. 2 days ago, we had 2 candidates that were being interviewed. So we actually, you could, if you came, you had to pick which interview you got to go watch. So join us on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. The other weeks of the month, you are welcome to, if you want to still conduct an interview, if we were to do one next week at 1:00 live, it would be via the internet so that everybody could watch it. But the first and third Thursdays or first and third Wednesdays, we're meeting on in person only, no online option, right here at Christ United Methodist Church, the same place we're meeting at right now. All right, time to hear about the Interview Success Workshop. Good morning, Walt.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Friday. We talked about the pit crew where you can do a mock interview, which I hardly recommend, and I also serve as a panelist for that group. But as I was looking for a job after 25 years working for a company, and I went to an interview, I failed so miserably that I said, this will never happen again. So I developed what I call the 3-legged stool of the model of selling, and how do we sell ourselves? And it's based on 3 things. We sell who we are, what we do, and how we help. Our soft skills, our characteristics, our activities, our hard skills, and the value that we can bring to the organization and to the team. So how do we do that? So I developed the Interview Success Workshop. It's focused on learning how to sell. It's not a mock interview. It is a learning interview. We're going to cover 12 basic categories of questions and talk about strategies, structures, options, ways that we might approach and answer, because it depends on the question, it depends on who's asking, and it depends on where you are in the process. So you have to be registered to attend. My About section on LinkedIn will tell you about the workshop. Basically, you just send me an email to my Yahoo email address. That QR code will start an email for you to send to me, and we can get you registered. And I'll send you back some potential dates, and we'll get you scheduled and get you on. So it's not really a difficult time. It's a learning time. We put our learning hat on. What can we do about that? Well, we reduce the tension and stress by just having the workshop part of it. Yes, you'll get an interview. Yes, you will be recorded. But the idea is that we're focused on learning. We're not focusing on a grading, just learning. No stress, no anxiety. So I'll call it learning without squirming. Do you believe in deja vu? Seems like I've said a poem or two. If you don't know what that means, then I'm here to spill the beans. It's learning interview where this one leans.
Thank you very much, Walt. All right, it's time to hear the career tip of the week. There's a brand new career tip of the week on the Career FW and Career USA websites every Saturday afternoon. So Rosanna, thank you for being with us and reading it today.
Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. All right, this week's tip of the week is dated March the 12th of 2023, and it's, are you prepared to be interviewed by an AI? All right, so in summary, human resources departments are increasingly turning to automated video interviews. And some even rely on AI, which is artificial intelligence, to make decisions about who moves to the next round. As a job seeker, can you prepare for these interviews, or how do you prepare for these interviews, particularly when the interviewer is just a screen? Evidence-based suggestions include understanding which type of automated interview you'll be encountering, and then go on with the knowledge and the technology. And it's so far from perfect or unbiased, and practicing being as human as possible, even if it feels awkward. During the isolation of the pandemic, many human resource management processes moved online. And even as life goes back to being more in person, many of these processes are here to stay. So one is virtual or pre-recorded job interviews, which are increasingly guided by artificial intelligence, which is AI. These interviews typically shorten the hiring process, making it cheaper for companies to find the right candidates. This shift has forever changed the experience of job seekers, and not always for the better. Today, younger job seekers looking for their first role, placement, or internships are likely to face a bot at their first interview, not a human. And in the most extreme type of automated video interviews, which are now referenced as AVIs, a bot asks a few predefined questions, giving the candidate a short window of time to answer them, and making a decision about that person right then and there. We define these as AI-led interviews. And while some things about AVIs and traditional in-person or phone interviews remain the same, job candidates must still make a good first impression. There's much that remains mysterious to job seekers about AI-led interviews. What is different in making a good impression online versus in person? And how do you impress an algorithm? This short guide provides some advice on navigating these questions. First, we give a brief overview of what AVIs consist of and what data is likely to be collected during the interview process. And then second, we outline how you can prepare psychologically to face the algorithm. And then finally, we provide some guidance about the practical steps you can take to make a good first impression. Now, everybody, this interview or this article is very long, so I'm going to capture a lot of the highlights, but I encourage you to go back and read the entire thing. All right, so what are automated video interviews? The first step is preparing to become aware of what kind of interview you're about to take. There are different types depending on how technology is used in the selection process, and AI can be involved in varying degrees. It is also important to note that not all video interviews use AI technology. For example, some interviews are just a recording of a video, which will then be watched by hiring managers. Others will involve AI processing different types of data collected during the interview. Here are a few key types of interviews. And to be sure your upcoming interview indeed includes AI, keep an eye out for the following terms in the emails you receive about the interview or in the fine print. So look for terms like machine learning, predictive analytics, decision algorithms, recommendation engines, or data-driven decisions. If you identify these terms, you can expect 3 types of data might be collected. Visual, which is going to be your facial expressions, eye movement, and hand movement. Verbal, which is vocabulary, keywords. And vocal, which would be voice tone and pronunciation. AI-led interviews use the data collected to automatically generate a prediction on whether the candidate is the person they are looking for. All right, so next, AI-led interviews are not superior selection tools, not yet. Interviews using AI have something in common. You will find yourself in front of a screen, sometimes with your own image reflected back at you, answering automated questions with a little time to think. Gone are the days of human interaction and real-time cues that we get from interviewers, which give us the immediate sense of how we're doing. Also gone are the transition times to the office or other physical building, and there is no journey to prospective work locations, no shift of an environment that prepares you to mentally switch into the interview mode. So that means that the technology is often not good enough to measure what it's supposed to measure, or in other words, that the AI is not as advanced as advertised. Unsurprisingly, some analysts have deemed that the use of facial recognition and other technology as pseudoscience, and some courts have outlawed it. So we advise taking a pragmatic view of whatever judgment that the technology may have, which is imprecise and potentially flawed and biased. In other words, do not let AI judgment knock down your self-confidence prior to or during an interview. So next, making a good impression means staying human. Despite the flaws of AVIs, particularly those that use AI, it's likely to you'll still encounter them. So how can you best approach these interviews? Many AI interview platforms suggest that you just be yourself. And yet in our previous research, we noticed that this is precisely what the job candidate finds difficult. Faced with an AVI, they tended to behave in unnatural ways. People told us how they adjusted themselves in ways they thought would make them look better, and then keeping a rigid posture, a fixed gaze, and using their hands as little as possible. In trying to make a good impression on the algorithm, many of our interviewees told us that they felt like they were becoming robots themselves. So let's go into some of the different things you could do. So first, get used to speaking to a screen. Ask a friend to use Zoom or WhatsApp video and have them ask you pre-recorded questions or pre-arranged questions. Increasingly, interview questions can be found in question banks that are offered by different university sites that prepare students to face interviews. Also, just me personally, I recommend going out to Google and just putting in interview questions for and some of your job titles, like interview questions for senior recruiter. It's going to come up with a lot of questions that would be more targeted, specific to what you may be asked on an interview. All right, so I'm going to continue on in the article. So they also suggest a 3-step approach to the role play. So initially, practice by having your cameras on so that friends ask questions while they see themselves on screen. But then initially, the presence of another human will be reassuring to help you find the confidence to answer those questions. And then you want to also record yourself, play it back, and analyze what you did well. Remember, positive psychology tells us that focusing on strengths rather than on development points can result in a faster improvement of desired behaviors. Second, repeat the same exercise with your friend asking questions, but now with the camera off. It will give you it will be more awkward to speak to a black screen, but you will be getting closer to what it would be like to use an AVI. And again, record yourself, analyze the recording, identify what you did well, and note whether there are differences in this round. And then third, prepare a few questions in a document and go solo. Speak to your computer screen and record yourself. What did you do well? And what did you do differently than when you were facing a human? By proceeding through all 3 steps analytically, you can become aware of how you perform under different types of conditions. And with practice, you'll be able to match your spontaneity to a human-to-human conversation, even during an AVI. And then finally, while the psychological preparation is part of getting ready for an AVI, the practical part is important too. We found that successful candidates in our research spent time making sure that their environment was somewhat work-like. So they had a neutral background, ensuring that the lighting and the sound was good so that they could be captured well on the camera, and double check that their technology was working properly. They also did their rehearsals in the same setting before the interview and blocked out enough time to do the interview comfortably. Essentially, they behaved as though they were going to an in-person interview by preparing psychologically and physically. So AVIs as a novel form of recruitment can have steep learning curves for job candidates. And we ask that you be reflexive of the process and your performance without judging yourself. We are humans, and having to face a new technology at such an important moment, a job interview, and that can create discomfort and anxiety. But like everything else, the more experience you get to an automated interview, the better you'll perform. And remember, the technology is new. A lot of research tells us that this is not as clever as you might think and is limited in understanding exactly who you are. So don't let it rattle your self-confidence. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, that was the career tip of the week, dated March the 12th, and it's, are you prepared to be interviewed by an AI? All right, have a great weekend, everybody.
Rosanna, thank you very much. I know that was a real long one today, so thank you very much. One of the things I do encourage you when you do this, you want to make sure that when you're looking at your camera, you may want to get yourself a little smiley face. I've got them on my cameras at home just to remind me exactly where to look and just to remind me to smile. I'll send it out when I put out the email this afternoon. I'll attach a sheet of smiley faces and you can cut the one you want and put it right by your camera. That way you remember exactly where to look. All right, today for lunch, hopefully you'll want to come join us today. We're going to go to Country Burger, 3115 West Parker Road, the northwest corner of Parker and Independence. They have burger, salad, chicken, and other items. So please come join us for that. That'll be today at 11:45. Coming up in just a couple minutes, we're going to talk all about background checks with Mike Coffey. But first, I just want to mention our upcoming programs. Next Friday, PJ Dunn will be with us to talk about Clifton Strengths and Core Clarity. If you've not taken Strength Finders, Clifton Strength Finders 2.0, I really recommend taking it because it's really, I think, one of the important tools that you can use to explain to somebody else who you are, what you do, and how you can help them. So if you haven't taken it, I encourage you to go online and take it. And PJ will be with us next week. And then in 2 weeks, Crystal Yates will be with us to talk all about negotiating your final contract, your final deal, how you're going to, when it gets down to, they want to make you the offer, what do you do then? All right, well, our speaker today is Mike Coffey. He's going to talk all about background checks. Mike runs a background check company out of Fort Worth. He'll tell us more about that. He's been presenting to this group 10, 11, 12 years in a row now. I mean, it's really appreciate Mike coming and explaining the good and the bad, all about background checks. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'm going to pull my screen up. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Good. Okay. Just as we got on here, I messed up the cable broke the cable to my mic. So I'm having to use the onboard speaker. So onboard mic. Sorry about that.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. So there's my screen. I think you can see everything.
Yep, we can see you.
All right. Okay, well, it's great to be back with y'all. I see from the podium camera a couple faces I recognize. So hello to y'all. And as Jeff said, I'm Mike Coffey. I'm a career HR guy who had a consulting firm, and 24 years ago, to take care of one client, nationwide financial services company, got into the background screening business. And so we, in most of our revenue now, 2 decades later, is all is really, related to the background check side. I still spend a decent amount of my time consulting with employers around their employee selection process. and the occasional employee relations issue. Give me a manager who can't keep his hands to himself, and I've got a good day ahead of me. So I like those kind of investigations too. But we're here to this is a presentation I originally put together for Jeff, gosh, like you say, 10 or 12 years ago, to help job seekers understand what's going on and what an employer is doing when they talk about a background check, and your rights under federal law with regard to what the background checks really require. One thing that I want to emphasize is that most employers, if you have a criminal history, and that's what we automatically think about often with background checks, most employers are second chance employers. Whether they know it or not. I mean, most of them do realize they have people with some sort of criminal history working for them, and we'll talk about what employers' considerations are with regard to criminal history. But I've definitely, over the last 24 years, seen employers' consideration of criminal history evolve, and I find that employers are a lot more probably fair and practical in how they evaluate criminal history than maybe they were a couple dozen years ago. And so I say that because I still, I speak to felony friendly job fairs and other groups that are helping individuals with criminal history look for meaningful work. And often individuals are overreacting or overly hesitant to apply for positions because they've got something negative in their background, whether it's criminal history or a bad employment history or experience or something like that. So my advice on that is nothing ventured, nothing gained. Always, if it's a position that you're uniquely qualified for, always, be prepared. But don't assume that an employer might consider you because of something that may be in your background. But the first rule is no surprises, and we'll probably come back to this several times over the presentation. But what you don't want is the background check to have any surprises on it. So we're going to talk about what the content of typical background checks are, but the reality is employers are only running background checks at the end of the process, usually when they've got their final candidate. And that is not the time for them to find out something, but that maybe they may consider adverse. And if they learn about something early in the process, especially if you proactively disclose it, then you're in a position where, hey, the employer says, okay, well, they're being frank and honest with us about it, and it's not directly relevant to the job, or it's something that, we can, if we've got some concerns about, we can try to address. But when, in the last mile of the interview process, they learn something, especially from the background check, then they've got a challenge. And so that's the real issue. And we'll talk a little bit about how to address some of those issues. The first thing I'll say is you may well hear from different kinds of consultants that are helping job seekers to put on, if there's something that, difficult to explain, to put on the termination reason for a previous employer, or to put on the criminal history question that you may encounter, to write, "We'll discuss." And I can tell you from talking to hundreds of employers over my career, we'll discuss. When an employer sees that, the response is often, "No, we won't," because I just asked you a legal question on my application or my process, and you've just demonstrated to me that and whether it's fair or not, the impression is from your own behavior in making this choice is that you're going to be the kind of person who follows company policies and rules to the extent that it's convenient for you, that your level of cooperation is going to be subjective to how you feel about a certain circumstance and those kinds of things. And that's not what employers are looking for. Employers are not looking for people that they have to manage additional, more than the rest of the population. So will discuss is never a good answer. So you need to be prepared. So let's talk about criminal history first. When you're posed with the criminal history question, answer the question that's asked. And you've got several different examples of questions here. Some of them, the first two are not very good questions. The third one is the one we give our clients, which basically says, tell us everything. But if you've had 3 misdemeanors in the last 5 years, and the criminal history question is simply, have you been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years? Then your answer on that application is no, right? I mean, answer that question. But if it's similar to this last question, have you ever had a criminal case filed against you, regardless of disposition or outcome, or have you ever served probation, community service, or completed other conditions to avoid prosecution, and you did deferred adjudication or a pretrial intervention or something like that? Then your answer is yes, and they'll ask you for the details. The idea of ban the box where employers just have a criminal history question that's a yes or no without any explanation or description of the offense, just I don't see that out there. What I see is employers asking for the details, and you want to be ready with those details and explain those to them. So you do need to have an explanation of what happened, but don't play the blame game. It wasn't fair, or I had one applicant tell me once, well, yes, I did that, but the only reason I got in trouble for it was because I went to high school with that police officer, and he's had it in for me since back then. Okay, well, employers are concerned with the underlying conduct. What conduct did you engage in? And that's what, we're evaluating that conduct against the behavior. Especially if your criminal offense is something that really may be relevant to the job that you're being considered for, go ahead and get certified copies of the court documents. Have those ready in case the employer asks for them. So you understand, so that you can demonstrate to them that you're prepared, that you're owning whatever happened, and that your explanation lines up with court documents. Now, I will still always tell employers, that's great, let us verify what the applicant told you, because if all the applicants were honest, I would be out of business. And the fact is that they're not. We see fabricated court documents. We see things that have been edited. We have sent, because sometimes what our research shows and the documents the applicant would give us to say that while we're wrong, we've sent those documents to the court, and the court clerk calls us and says, who gave you this? Where did you get it? And we tell them the applicant, the defendant in this case, and they say, do you have an address for them? Because the judge wants to send a marshal out to arrest them for fabricating a court document. And so, so don't do that, but do have documents that are legitimate and explain the story and support your story. Then be ready with the story about how the person, how this critical error in judgment, which is a really great way, euphemism for, some past criminal decision, how this critical error in judgment is not reflective of who you are today. Be ready to talk about what you learned from that experience, and give examples of how your decisions since this experience and maybe before demonstrate that this is not normally who you are. If you've got a long history of volunteerism and being a reliable employee and all these things, and what we see a lot of are that upstanding, fine citizen gets a DWI. And it happens. And, quite honestly, for many of us there, but for the grace of God. And so be ready to, demonstrate how and own, I made a horrible decision, but here's the story about who I am. And maybe your previous history up to that decision was a hot mess. But maybe that was the point in your life where you said, I got to get my stuff together and make different kinds of decisions. Be ready to, whatever it is, tell that story. I think that's really critical. And that goes a long way with an employer. but understand what employers are considering typically. They're looking at what did the person do? How does that conduct relate to the position? And so is it reasonable to believe the person engaged in that conduct? Certainly, if you were convicted, it does. If you pled guilty, like a deferred adjudication, in every state that I've researched, to get a deferred adjudication, you enter a plea of guilty or no contest to the criminal history. I'm on deferred a lot. It seems like every few years, because I get it for I get a speeding ticket, and you can go down to the municipal court and get deferred adjudication. You enter a plea of guilty, and as long as you don't get other tickets, they dismiss the case. So, but you can get that. Something like, I think the number is 40% of criminal cases in Texas end in deferred adjudication. And an employer is concerned with the underlying conduct, not the outcome, that was a conviction. Is it reasonable to believe this person engaged in that conduct? Well, certainly if you entered it into deferred adjudication and pled guilty or no contest, it's reasonable to believe that you engaged in that conduct. But sometimes even dismissed cases, an employer may ask you about a dismissed case. Okay, so we saw this dismissed case, or you told me about this dismissed case, ideally. Tell me what happened. And why was it dismissed? Be ready with all that information, because sometimes a dismissal does not mean you did not engage in the conduct. There are a variety of reasons things get dismissed. So be sure you can just explain what those reasons were. And then they're going to look at how long ago did this happen? Maybe this is relevant to the job, but it happened 7 years, 15 years ago. Then that makes it a lot less relevant in the intervening time. There's this idea out there that things disappear after 7 years, and convictions do not. In Texas, convictions and under federal law, convictions are reportable forever. And indeed, we report to our clients everything that we can legally report. So if it's an employer in Texas, we report it forever. Now, there are other jurisdictions. California, an employer can only consider convictions in the last 7 years. And so that limits a lot of that. So think about this: embezzlement. So if my CFO was convicted 10 years ago of embezzlement, it's probably not my ideal CFO candidate. However, in California, the employer can't consider that. And so on occasion, I'll talk to a candidate with a fairly notorious criminal history that's at some point in the past, but would give pause to many employers. And they say, well, how am I ever going to get a job? And I tell them, California is not a bad place to live if you don't mind paying a lot of taxes, and maybe that's something you consider. But then Madison, Wisconsin, employers are limited from considering employment or previous criminal between 3 and 5 years old. And so sometimes I say, how do you feel about cold winters? And, and so there are options, but the reality is that for most employers, the longer ago, and most offenses, the longer ago it happened, and the more history you've got to demonstrate that that's not reflective of who you are, then you're going to be in better shape. And then the employers are going to look at all that, plus how this applicant, and they're looking at the total applicant, not just your criminal. None of us are just our criminal history. Well, if you're Ted Bundy, you're just your criminal history. You're Charles Manson, you're just your criminal history. But by and large, most of us have a bunch of things, qualifications, experiences, education that we also bring to a job. And so employers are looking at the whole applicant and comparing it to the rest of the applicant pool. And then in some cases, they are looking at regulations or insurance policies and things like that limit how they can have, who they can have in certain roles. And sometimes it's agreements with their own customers. If you go to work in some of the call centers that handle a lot of insurance, health insurance, especially information, Aetna, and a lot of those customers who use those call centers have real strict requirements about who can have access to patient information and be making phone calls to patients for surveys and things like that. So sometimes employers do have restrictions on them that are driven by their customers. So the other big question that comes up with employers or with job candidates is, well, what about my termination reason? That's the other place where we see we'll discuss a lot on the application process. And so the simple answers there are, first, find out, call both the HR department at your previous employer if you're concerned about what somebody may say, and call your previous supervisor, find out what they will say. Some employers will call HR and just verify employment directly through HR, but many employers will pick up the phone and call that former supervisor. And even if it's against company policy, they will, some supervisors will give, will give references to prospective employers. And so be prepared for that. You have no control over whether that former supervisor follows policy or not. So it doesn't hurt to know exactly what they're going to say. And so assume that they're going to talk to the previous supervisor. And then when you're posed with a question about your termination reason, answer it honestly and don't engage in the blame game. Again, sometimes, a fair answer and an accurate answer is, I worked for this company for a number of years and was successful and enjoyed the job. And then sometimes you get a new supervisor and both parties try to make it successful, try to make it work out, but in the end, they can't. And, in those cases, and that's what I found myself in, and it's time, I had to make the choice that we weren't going to be able to make this successful. So in the best interest of the company and my own career, I chose to move on. That's a fair answer if that's the circumstance, but make sure that, you can say that and without throwing the previous supervisor under the bus, right? And now if they call that previous supervisor and that previous supervisor says something similar, but throws you under the bus in the process, you're going to look a little better by taking the high ground than having simply thrown that supervisor under the bus. And so think about how, if you were in that hiring manager's role, what would tell you, what would relate the story well and still reflect positively on you without fabricating anything or avoiding being honest, because what you don't want are additional facts to come out during the reference check. And then sometimes, especially with applicant tracking systems, reason for termination may only have so much space that you can put in. And if you really need to explain things to make it clear what the reason for termination was, add another document, put it in your cover letter on your resume or whatever process you can figure out for that employer to get that additional information. And if not, at the interview, whether it's criminal history, if maybe they haven't asked a criminal history question yet, or they've not delved into the termination reason stuff, or there's just something else out there that may come up that may be relevant, that the employer at least may be relevant. And that's the thing, is as the candidate, you don't get the choice of deciding what's relevant. That's going to be the hiring manager in the company. So if you think there's something that they may see as somewhat relevant, be proactive and lay your cards on the table at the end of the interview when things have gone well. Say, hey, I'm really encouraged by this. I think this is a position that my skills would really serve this company well. And I think this is a company that would really benefit from having me here. And I think I'd really benefit from the professional opportunity. But there's something here that may come up at some point as you check references or do the background check. And I just want to be open and honest with you about it. That goes a long way versus the employer finding out about it when they're calling references or relying on the background check company to do those references or check your verifications and stuff, or check your criminal history. I've got a question here. Let me see. It's a big, long one, so I may read that in just a bit. But so let's jump through and let's talk a little bit more about what the actual screening process is. If the employer has a really good process in place and they've asked all the right questions, and if the applicant has been forthcoming, whether the questions are asked or not during the process, then all the background check should be is a lie detector test. Was this applicant honest with me? And I'll tell you that we see most of our applicants who are turned down, who lose a job opportunity because of the background check. It's probably 75 or 80% of the time because they weren't honest with the employer in the process. Sometimes they lie outright, and sometimes they just avoid stuff, and the employer feels like they were dishonest or evasive. And so in the perfect world, if employers have a good process and the applicant's forthcoming, the background check should have no surprises. There shouldn't be anything on there that the employer didn't already know. But the first thing we're going to do when we do a background check is verify the identity of the person that we're running the background check on. As we normally call them the consumers because of the way the law refers to them, but the consumer or the applicant. And that basically means we're taking their name, date of birth, and social security number, running that against a giant data set. We've heard about big data, and that's what we're talking about here. Is it's data accumulated from credit bureaus, driver's license files, all these other sources, and verifying that name and date of birth and social are corroborated in big data, that this is really who the applicant is. It also will tell us other names that are associated with that applicant. If Mary Smith, before she got married 5 years ago, was Mary Jones, we're going to do research on especially the criminal research under Mary Smith and Mary Jones. So we need to know, all of those aliases that are associated with somebody, because sometimes applicants know that their criminal history is under this other name. And so they're not going to provide that name to the employer. We see people apply for jobs using their middle name and their last name because they know their criminal history is out there. I'm Michael Ray Coffey. And so if I apply as Ray Coffey, all these criminal records are indexed by name and date of birth in the courthouses. And so if you go search for Ray Coffey, you're not going to find all the bad deeds in my background. And so that's why we do all this identity research. It also gives us all a good address history, because if anybody knows where you've been, it's the people you owe money to. They tell it to the credit bureaus, and a lot of this data comes from credit bureaus. So we get a really robust history of addresses, and that tells us where to go do research for the criminal piece. And then criminal backgrounds. That's what most people think about when they're talking about background checks. And it would curl your hair if you understood how bad the criminal record system and how decentralized it is in the U.S. Texas DPS, the Texas Department of Public Safety, has a statewide criminal records database here in Texas. And we ran everybody on death row through Texas DPS's database, and it was missing a third of them. And so now the good news is those people aren't out looking for work, but the problem is still that we find that to be the case across the state. Is the records we find in the local courthouses, walking into Dallas County, Tarrant County, Travis County, Webb County, wherever, the records we find at the local courthouse, a third of them are missing from DPS's data. And so there's no such thing as a national or reliable national database. You hear about this a lot from news stories about people who were able to purchase a firearm from a licensed firearm dealer, and they got a clear background check, but in fact they had a felony conviction that should have precluded them from buying a weapon. So it happens, and that's why there's no such thing as a reliable criminal database. And so when you go online and you do a search and you see that somebody will sell you one for $20 or $30 and the results come back instantly, what that tells you is this is a really unreliable criminal background. But the reality is that the more the more thorough the employer is, the more risk averse the employer is, the more thorough the background check is. So just assume when you're going into this that the employer does a really good background check, and that that something very old may show up. And so if the employer asks a question about it, make sure you're straight with them about it, because you're never going to get a chance to argue with them about what's fair and or not fair according to their policies later. And then, of course, and we've talked about references, employers are going to check. Ideally, they're going to check. They're going to try to verify all the claims you made about your education, your employment, your licensure, those kinds of things. We see more people, in fact, lying about their employment history and their education history than we see lying about their criminal history. People are buying degrees online from degree mills for a few $100. And some of these degree mills, you go to their website and the website looks like a legitimate school. And it's got pictures of co-eds walking around the campus and the whole 9 yards, but it doesn't even exist. But you pick up that phone and call the registrar's office and they answer the phone and they will verify that degree for you. So we see that a lot. And we see people who claim to have worked for XYZ company. We call XYZ company and they've never heard of them. We see people list a supervisor and phone number for that supervisor. And we call and it sets off our spidey sense, or we know we're talking on a cell phone. So this is a reference and not a verification. And so our policy is to circle back to HR and verify it through HR too. And we call HR and they've never heard of either that supervisor or that employee. So increasingly more and more employers over the last few years, this really got really bad about 2009 with the Great Recession. Employees, to make themselves look more qualified for the fewer number of jobs, really started fabricating stuff on their applications and resumes. So more and more employers are verifying the stuff either in-house or through their background screening company. So just know that that's there. And of course, your driving history. Now, this may be a job that you're not driving. You're gonna, that doesn't involve driving. All you're gonna do is sit behind a desk all day. That's great. But some employers still run driving histories for positions working in warehouses. Maybe you'll never drive, but you may operate a forklift, or it may just be a safety sensitive position. We've got a client in a metal fabrication company, and they run driving histories on everybody to see what that person's safety performance level is apart, just when they're out and, when away from work, but just operating a motor vehicle on a public road, because they're going to draw a correlation between how that person operates motor vehicle and the safety awareness they're going to bring inside of their manufacturing facility. And sometimes the driver's license is also used to verify that name, date of birth, and address provided match the government's records. Because remember, I said our identity research stuff is primarily just big data. And, but if I can go to the state and get the driving record and verify the information on their DL, that's another verification of that person's identity. And then there's the credit issue. Employers can get a credit report on prospective employees. And with the exception of a few states, they can do it for every employee. Now, some states have limitations on the kinds of employees, the kinds of responsibilities that the role has in order to pull a credit report. But don't assume. I spend more time talking employers out of running credit reports because they often don't tell the story that employers think. Because it used to be you hear employers quite often say that, well, somebody's credit report at least tell me if they take care of business, if they're reliable, if those kinds of things. But in reality, and we really saw this back in the Great Recession, 2009, 2010, but it's always been the case that things happen outside of people's control, and that they often have financial impacts. A family member gets sick, or that individual gets sick. Somebody loses a job, a spouse loses a job. All those things can affect a family's ability to pay, to meet all their obligations on time. And so employers, I spend more time, like I said, talking employers into not using credit reports for a lot of positions because they really don't tell the story. Now, where somebody's going to have fiduciary responsibility, either managing the company's accounts or clients' money, those kinds of things, or maybe they're going to have access to credit cards, company credit cards, or company accounts, or even access to personally identifiable information, really sensitive information that could be converted by an employee for illicit purposes. In those cases, many employers are using credit. Now, you need to understand too, your credit score doesn't matter because employers don't see credit scores if they're pulling the credit reports from credit bureaus for the legitimate way, because the credit bureaus will not share a credit score with an employer for an employment purpose. Also know that credit reports that are pulled for employment purposes are soft hits on your credit. So they're not going to affect your credit score like a hard hit would, like if you were applying for a loan or something like that. And you can get your credit report for free to see what's on it. And I recommend, even if you're not job seeking, go do this at least once a year. You can get on an annual basis your credit report from all three credit bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, for free. And I recommend everybody do it because there are a lot of errors on credit reports. And so now is the time to clean it up. And you can do that at annual. It's www.annualcreditreport.com. There's a lot of other sites out there that'll try to sell you a credit report, but this is the one that the three bureaus have set up, and you will, to meet the their requirements under federal law, and you will get it for free. Now they may try to sell you to buy your credit score, so you also get your score with it, and they can charge you for that. And unless you've really got some loan activity, you're getting ready to buy a car or a house or something like that, probably don't care about that. So don't spend that money unless you really need it. What you really want to do is look at those accounts and make sure everything is reflected correctly, and dispute anything that's incorrect. Another thing we see employers order in their background checks is civil litigation. Who sued you? Who have you sued? And what were the circumstances around that? This is mostly for C-level positions. This is expensive research to do well. And so they're primarily doing it with C-level positions or other positions where there's high levels of trust or public exposure. We've got a municipal client here in Texas who hired a city manager, and they found out when the local newspaper, after they announced the city manager selection and the city manager started their role, the local newspaper decided to do a background check, or more likely somebody picked up the phone and called the local newspaper and explained, hey, this guy got sued for all this fraud and stuff, and had to make these big settlements. You want to know that on a public figure or somebody who's going to be high profile in your organization before you hire them. And so many employers are doing that for those positions that are particularly high profile. And then the one that I spend a lot of time not necessarily talking employers out of, but really trying to get employers to be thoughtful about how they use, is social media. Back in the good old days, we'd be at a party back when I was in college, way pre-internet. People would take pictures, and there'd be photos from, good times, and we're all having fun here. And someplace there are some folks, some fraternity brothers who have a shoebox full of photos from the 80s, and I hope their house burns down, and takes those pictures with them, because there are things that are out there that probably I never want to see again. But employers are increasing, now we post all this stuff online, and like I just spent last week in Columbia with a couple buddies on a long guys weekend, and I just hung it all out there, so you can see what we did in Columbia on my Facebook. And I'm that way. I'm open about it, but I'm not looking for work. But the reason employers are interested in this are like a recent example is January 6th, right? Employers want to know before they bring somebody on board if somebody's got issues out there. There are things that could negatively impact the company. And it may be the company doesn't even care about that position, but do we really want to bring somebody into this role who will bring a lot of media scrutiny to the company, a lot of negative public feedback? And so they want to at least know what's going on. Another great example, way back in 2011, when Jared Loughner shot Representative Gabby Giffords. Within hours of that shooting, the media had dug up this guy's MySpace and other crazy and YouTube videos and all these other crazy things he had posted, his old manifesto and all that. That wasn't a workplace shooting, but had that been a workplace shooting, it would have been all over the media, would have been negative for the employer, but also the plaintiff's lawyers would have been saying, hey, this is public information. It's right there on the, for anybody to find, and you didn't see it. You didn't even do your due diligence in trying to create a safe workplace. So it's things like that that are driving employers to continue to, increasingly look at social media. Now, when we're working with employers around social media, we do try to encourage them to give us, we get really specific things that we want them to have us look for, things that are threatening or coercive or harassing or violent, things that are, in some cases, some employers are concerned about really sexually explicit information that people are posting publicly, things that suggest theft, dishonesty, those kinds of things. But also, we have a client whose employees, because of the nature of their business, often have to, some of their employees are scientists and they have to testify in court cases. And so that employer has us also looking for social media statements that are specific, particularly pro or con, positive or negative around law enforcement or the criminal justice system, because they don't want somebody who can be impeached on the stand, and whether they're very pro law enforcement or anti law enforcement, or have these really hot sports opinions around the criminal justice system, that's something that the opposing counsel could use to undermine their credibility in front of a jury. So they're, because they're supposed to be really impartial. So those are the kinds of reasons employers are looking at social media. Now, we have a dozen other things that we do for employers, but these are the ones you most commonly see from employers. And we have clients whose background checks are $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 because of the depth of the research that they do. So be aware of the sensitivity around the job that you conduct, the role that you're looking at, and what the employer's concerns may be, because there may be other searches that they choose to do. Now let's talk about the legal stuff on it. Now, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is a horribly named law that governs the use of information by employers that's collected by third parties, like a background screening company. It really ought to be called the Fair Consumer Reporting Act, because it applies even if there's no credit report involved in the background check. And it governs the use of information collected by third parties sold to employers, lenders, insurance companies for evaluating consumers' eligibility for employment insurance or a loan. And so it ought to be called the Fair Consumer Reporting Act, but just ignore the word credit in it. The FCRA places a lot of responsibilities on the background screening company around accuracy. And some of us in our industry do better around accuracy than others. There are large data companies out there that are basically data brokers, and they shoehorn a whole bunch of information into a big database and just kind of regurgitate it to employers. And often they attach the records to the wrong person, things like that. But there are a lot of really good screening companies that do a good job of making sure things are accurate as well and complying with the responsibilities placed on us by the FCRA. So from your perspective, the FCRA gives the consumer or the applicant certain rights. First being that there are limitations on what can be included in a consumer report. Now, convictions, as I said earlier, a criminal conviction is reportable forever. And regardless of salary or how long ago it happened, it can be reported to an employer forever. Now, other things, criminal cases that didn't end in a conviction are reportable for 7 years. After 7 years, they're only reportable to the employer if it's reasonable to expect that the individual will make more than $75,000 a year. And in those cases, it is reportable. Now, $75,000 a year seems like a weird standard, right? But when this law was passed in the 70s, $75,000 a year was a highly compensated individual compared to today. And so they've just never really changed the law. So increasingly, $75,000, is not nearly as high as salary. So know that if you're making more than $75,000, non-conviction cases, civil cases, negative employment, everything is reportable forever if you're making more than 75K a year. So just know that. My other recommendation is that you need to understand is that this is information that I, as the consumer reporting agency or the background check company, can tell an employer. It's not a limitation on what employers can consider. So if the employer asks you a really expansive question that doesn't have a 7-year limit, still, if you're in Texas or under federal law, you still need to answer it honestly. And I talk to a lot of applicants who say, well, my lawyer said that wouldn't be on my background check. And it is on their background check because lawyers, both employment law lawyers and criminal defense lawyers have no understanding. This is not employment law. This is consumer reporting law. And they don't really understand this law very often. And so just because your lawyer says it won't be on your record doesn't mean it necessarily won't. They may mean it won't be on your record as a conviction, but deferred adjudications don't automatically drop off your criminal history in Texas. So know that there's a good chance, even if I can't tell an employer about it, it may still show up if the employer finds out about it some other way. And as I said, know that always criminal convictions in Texas and under federal law are reportable forever and may well show up forever. So if 20 years ago you had a shoplifting conviction when you were 18 years old, and the employer asks about all criminal cases you've ever had filed against you, tell them about that stupid shoplifting thing from 20 years ago. They are not, I've yet to find an employer who's going to automatically disqualify you for that. But know that they will disqualify you if they find out about it and you lied on the application. The gospel according to Coffey, commandment number 1 is if they lie to you coming in the door, it's not reasonable to expect their behavior to change after you hire them. And so we spend a lot of time training our employers to be fair, but also to protect themselves. And again, we're not looking for people we have to manage, give extra management attention to. So it'll be out there. The employers should be making a disclosure to you before they order the background check. And the disclosure says, hey, we're going to order a consumer report, and then they should be getting your authorization to do so as well. And it's rare that this is a paper disclosure anymore. Most employers are doing this electronically, but you should be getting an authorization and disclosure, and that should be, in the perfect world, a perfectly compliant legal world, that should be a separate document. It's not the small print at the back of the employment application. So you should, if you're paying attention to each document that you sign and give an authorization to, you should be seeing a specific disclosure about the background check. I still come across smaller, less sophisticated employers who go online and just run publicdata.com, which is not legal to run to use things like publicdata.com and been verified, different services that aren't consumer reporting agencies. And so, but the employers are not sophisticated and they're not doing all the authorizations. But most employers, because there have been so many class action lawsuits against employers for doing this wrong, most employers are doing a pretty good job of it now. As I said, in Texas and under federal law, there are a lot of things that are reportable, but do know that state by state, there are different rules about what can and can't be included in a report or what an employer can consider. So California, New York, even some cities have their own rules about what an employer can consider. And so know that depending on where you're applying, different rules may apply. But then the employer gets the background check back from the background screening company. If there's anything on the report that may, in whole or part, adversely impact the hiring decision, then the employer under the federal law has a responsibility to give the consumer or the applicant a copy of the report and a summary of their rights under the FCRA. Now that is pretty commonplace, but it's also a place where employers make mistakes and they don't always do it. So if an employer calls you and says, hey, we got your background check back and we got it shows this criminal history on it, and so we're not going to go forward, you're perfectly within your rights to ask for a copy of the report. The employer should have given you that before they ever made the hiring decision. And so you should certainly ask for a copy of it so you can see it, because on occasion there are inaccuracies. And under the federal law, you don't dispute the accuracy of the background check to the employer. You come back to the background screening company. And so, you dispute the accuracy of information to the screening company. And under federal law, we have 30 days to reinvestigate the accuracy of the information. But in honesty, if your employer is working with a good screening company, we're gonna be on that immediately. It's for really good screening companies, it almost never happens. We get disputes on occasion, but it's extremely rare that we actually change a report because of a dispute. Often applicants will call and argue with us, and our goal is we're usually just sweet and lovable to them. We listen to them complain. They just want to vent for a little bit. And then ultimately we say, okay, so are you saying this isn't right? And they're like, well, no, it's right. How am I ever going to get a job if this keeps showing up? Well, that's a different matter. And maybe we've got some resources to help you understand this process. But sometimes there are inaccuracies, and no screening company that's reputable wants to cost their client otherwise qualified candidate because they've provided bad information. They want to fix it right away. And on occasion, we see actual identity theft. This is a case out of our own files. We had a client that's a large social services organization here in North Texas who we donate all the background checks to. And they had an issue. They hired somebody who was going to be one of their lead managers over a services area. And we started doing the background check. And we verified their employment, and all their employment for like 15 years was totally verifiable. And they'd consistently been employed here in North Texas with well-known firms, and their employment all lined up. But their background check, when we ran the database at the beginning, that kind of points us to potential criminal cases in jurisdictions where we weren't going to search, because this person had always lived in Tarrant County, it looked like. So we were just going to search Tarrant County and Texas and the Federal District of North Texas, those things. But this database showed a record for this person, and it was a really unique name. I mean, I think, Ezekiel Uriah Jones, a really unique name. There's unlikely to be two people with that name and that date of birth, but the database spits out records out of South Carolina and Navarro County, Texas. And so something's wrong, because this guy served jail time and at the same time that they had actually actively worked for companies here in North Texas. So my analyst brought it to me, and we sat down and looked at it. And so we ordered court copies from South Carolina and Navarro County. And in fact, we got photos. We even ordered their mugshots from the local law enforcement. And we got their mugshots. This is the actual mugshots for this guy. And so something's going on. But before we reported the case, I called my client and said, hey, so tell me about this guy, Ezekiel Uriah Jones. And they said, oh, he's a great guy. He's well-known, he's on the board of these different organizations, and he's well respected, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, no, describe me physically. Have you met him? Oh, yeah, he's about a 6'2" black guy. And so I'm looking at these mugshots, and I'm like, okay, there's something here that's wrong. And if you look closely, these are the same guy. It's just been a rough 6 years between 96 and 2001. But so I called the applicant up directly and said, hey, we're completing your background check, and this information has come up, and we're a private investigations firm. We have a lot of resources to data, and we couldn't find anybody else with his name and date of birth in the country. And so I said, we've come up with these records, and he was stunned But then we got to talking about it. And the other thing we found is we pulled those court files, and one of the files had a social security number that had never been issued to anybody, and the other one belonged to a woman. So they were probably both just made up on the spot. But so he was kind of flabbergasted about it. Then he started thinking about the timetable of that first case, 1996, and he said, "That's interesting because back when I was in the military in the early 90s, my identity was stolen, and somebody opened checking accounts, and it was just a giant mess to get it cleaned up, when it was really hard in the early 90s because nobody really understood what's going on with identity theft." So, and he said that happened, and subsequent to that, when I get pulled over by the police or anything like that, they're always asking questions. They've asked questions about, have you ever been to South Carolina and things like that. But they're looking on TLETs or on the computer system there, and it says this is relatively short white guy, and they're looking at this is not the driver of the car, and then they verified the driver's license and all that. So nobody had ever told him something else is popping up out there connected to your identity. But so it made sense to him, and so then we connected him. The sheriff's departments here and in most larger counties at least have somebody who helps people remediate identity theft and criminal records. That's how often it can happen. So sometimes when the applicant says it's not me, it's really not them. But like 99% of the time, it really is them. And but we take it seriously, and most background screening companies do take it seriously when an applicant says, "This isn't me." We will go the extra route to verify, to protect our clients. And then after the employer ultimately makes that hiring decision that, hey, you've received a copy of your report and your rights under the law, and now we're going to go forward and make the hiring decision, they have to give you another notice if they make an adverse hiring decision. And so you should get 2 notices. So and I do on occasion talk to applicants who say they just got ghosted after the background check and everything was lined up, and it shouldn't happen, but on occasion it does. And if you just love the sound of my voice, I have a podcast that drops every week, Good Morning HR. It's the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. So it's basically an HR podcast. I've got a lot of entrepreneurs who listen as well. Now let me look at the questions and see what those look like. Jeff, does there any?
I didn't see any questions in the chat
Okay.
window. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to unmute your mic and ask Mike. Unmute your mic to ask Mike. There we go. Anybody have any questions? Oh, hold on a second.
Good morning, Mike. Superb presentation as usual. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing with us. The question is, it's just like ageism. We will be refused a position because of our age, but you can't prove it. So are there times when companies get the data, they're not supposed to use it, they obtained it illegally, whatever it might be, but they still, most companies are not going to reveal the reason that they do not hire you. They just don't hire you. Does that come across?
Well, most companies, because of the lawsuits that have been out there over the last 20 years, most companies, if it's related to the background check, the Fair Credit Reporting Act gives employers so much protection on the use of criminal history if they follow the law. That it's in their interest to do that. And so any company that's sophisticated at all is working with employment law counsel or a good HR consultant or has professional HR in-house, they tend to be doing this right. I do see small employers, 5, 10, 15 employees that aren't very sophisticated in their HR processes, who just don't know they're not doing it right or are scared. It gives some employers liver quiver to have a conversation with someone about their criminal history. And I've got webinars. I've got a dozen webinars on our website. And one of them is just about how to discuss criminal history with applicants. And just to tell them, basically, unless you're depending on the state, you can ask anything, and you should. ask a really thorough question, but also have policies in place that help you determine what's relevant and what's not. So it's not just you always hear the statement that employers should consider criminal history on a case-by-case basis. And the reality is that's a great way to invite bias into your hiring decision, because this hiring manager, may, say, okay, well, these 2 theft by checks from 5 years ago show that this person's dishonest. Maybe the next hiring manager in the next office doesn't feel that way. So that, there's a bias here. Or sometimes I'm a hiring manager, quite honestly, will say, this guy looks like me. He's got the same skin tone, or he's got the same cultural background, or went to the same school, and he's a good guy. So I can, I'll overlook this. I'll give him a shot. Where somebody with a different background doesn't get that. And unfortunately, that happens. So ideally, the employer will have policies that does give the opportunity, that assigns risk to the job and to that offense related to the job, but then still, gives the applicant to tell their side of the story and look at them all. But anyway, sometimes some employers are knuckleheads, and it's unfortunate. But I see less and less, because the law, with at least with regard to the criminal history and the background check stuff, they get more protection if they will follow the law than otherwise.
Thank you. Anybody out there have any questions? Anybody else? I know I worked for a company for a while, and one of the questions I was always asking the candidate is, we're going to run a background check on you. What am I going to find? And if they were open and honest and told me, here's what you may find, that's all I wanted to know. Because if it equal, and I didn't run the background check, I had to turn over to an HR department in another city. They ran the background check, and then if they found anything, they'd call you, they'd call you back up. Oh yeah, he told me all about the situation. Here's what's going on. So, that was okay, because we would hire people, even if they did have a background. I mean, everybody has a background, but if they had an issue, it wasn't a big deal as long as they were upfront and they told us what was going on.
Exactly.
Anybody else? Questions? Well, Mike, thank you very, very much for your information. I'll put Mike's contact information out on the email I put out this afternoon. Any other final words, Mike?
No, I best of luck to everybody in their job search. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to me over LinkedIn or email me. And if I can help, I'd be glad to.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you very, very much for your time today.
Thanks
Coming up next Friday, just a reminder, PJ Dunn will be with us to talk about strength finders and core clarity. And what core clarity is, it's when you take your strength, when you find out what your top 5 or top 10 strengths are, you then lay it out on a chart, and you have a better idea of exactly how you're using it, and maybe what kind of person you are, and how you can explain to prospective employers what you do. So join us next Friday. It'll be a very interesting presentation. Let's see here. If you have not put your 30-second introductions into the chat window, please do so. That way we can update the roster, and I'll put this information out this afternoon so that you can look over the list, and maybe you could help somebody out and find a contact that you've got a contact at one of these companies, and you can help somebody out. That would really be appreciated. Career DFW, Career USA, we're putting on training 4 days a week. Please join us next Tuesday. Terry Sullivan will be with us for LinkedIn Tuesdays to talk about how to create a LinkedIn brand that tells your key contacts who you are, what you do, and how you can help them. The event will not be recorded, so if you want to watch the session, you do need to watch it live next Tuesday at 1 o'clock Central. Next Wednesday, for Interviewing Wednesdays, we'll be talking about avoiding interview crashes. That'll be with Mark McDonald and Walt Glass. So there will not be a practice interview candidate next Wednesday, but we will be playing this presentation, avoiding interview crashes. Next Thursday, for Networking Thursday, Tom Jackson will be with us to talk about how to network. Tom's a project manager. He's very methodical in what he does. Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. So, come join us and listen to Tom's presentation on how to network. This session has been recorded. It will be on the Career FW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel. On the Career USA YouTube channel, click on playlist. Every video I post up there goes into a different playlist, and pick the one you want. And at the very bottom, it says view full playlist. When you do that, up will come a list of all the different dates and topics. Just remember that any of them from the North Dallas group, our speaker starts about 30 minutes in to the video, because the first 30 minutes is all of our preliminary stuff. Hopefully you won't come join us today at lunch at Country Burger. You got to eat lunch some point, so come join us today, 3115 West Parker, northwest corner of Parker at Independence. Burgers, chicken, salad, more. Just come join us. That way we'll get to know you a little bit better. So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody. Have a great weekend. Try to stay warm. I know in the DFW area, it's going to be chilly this weekend. So for everybody else, have a great weekend, and we will see you all later.